I'd like to give a special thanks to Global for their generous support of this program.
I wanted to be outdoors. It was so wonderful.
So then you go back into a standard office that doesn't have any of those features.
But they were trying to have those experiences throughout the day.
How do we bring those experiences, nature, into the built environment?
At home, they may have plants at their house. They may have a backyard. They may have a park nearby.
More biophilic features seem to have attracted people back. Play around with having a variety of different spatial experiences. It's not just a sea of workstations.
All our design decisions to support this healthiest building concept.
Brain is fluent with that kind of fractals, and that lowers our stress.
Specifically using biophilic design.
Using biomorphic forms and patterns that have a calming effect.
Understanding the opportunity is probably one of the best things that they can do. They already had the biophilic design solutions they were already coming up with. Here was the science and the evidence.
These are the ones that occur a lot in nature, and so when we see them in human design objects, the brain is predisposed to process them more easily.
What if the single most powerful thing you can do to get people to actually want to come back to the office had nothing to do with free food, flexible hours, collaboration, or even AI, and everything to do with trees, natural light, and the patterns found in nature? Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, the podcast where we dig into the forces reshaping where and how we work. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, and we're talking to the experts who are redefining how work happens and the work environment necessary to support it. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'd love to hear your comments below. And if you want to go deeper into the issues shaping work in the workplace, we've published a report, The State of the Workplace. The link is in the description below, and you can download it for free. Today, we're talking about biophilic design, the science of connecting people to nature through the built environment, and what it means for the office right now. My guest literally wrote the book on the subject. Bill Browning is a founding partner of Terrapin and one of the world's foremost authorities on biophilic design and the economics of sustainability. He's a founding member of the U.S. Green Building Council and an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects. Catie Ryan is a principal at Terrapin and co-author on their landmark publication, Nature Inside, which just published a new second edition through the Royal Institute of British Architects. She's a leading international biophilic design consultant for buildings, landscape, and master planning projects, and she has published extensively on biophilic design, for which she received the 2014 Environmental Design Research Association's Achievement Award. Bill and Catie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Give us a little insight into Terrapin Bright Green and what you do, and what was the primary driver for Nature Inside?
So we are a small research and consulting firm working in the built environment. We do a lot of work in complex green buildings. We do some work in biomimicry, innovation inspired by nature. But one of the things we're probably best known for is trying to understand how buildings impact people psychologically and physiologically. And that led us into the field of biophilia, human connection to nature, and how we bring those experiences of nature into the built environment.
So we have been working with corporate clients and nonprofits and governments for decades now, but a lot of the learnings that come out of those projects, which includes a lot of research, we've been able to codify into these various reports over the years. One of the things that we value most is being able to share our knowledge with the design community and beyond. So we make a point of periodically publishing articles, especially on biophilic design, but in sustainability in general, that really kind of provide that bridge between science and practice, theory and practice, so that it's available to everyone. So it started off, at least within biophilic design, it started off with the economics of biophilia in 2010 to 2012, and then 14 Patterns of Biophilic Design in 2014. And those two publications really gained a lot of traction and helped both the owners understand what the opportunity was, owners and investors, but also provided tools and resources for designers to kind of pitch their ideas or put weight behind the ideas that they already had, like the biophilic design solutions they were already coming up with. Here was the science and the evidence to show that their ideas had both experiential value and financial value to the client. So that's really the basis of a lot of our work. Nature Inside really came about much more recently. 2020 was the first publication, and Reba reached out to us to author this manuscript focused on Nature Inside. And we took some liberties and expanded it to go beyond the doors of a building. But the emphasis of the publication is on the experience indoors in various, we chose to focus on various sectors of or typologies to understand that certain science has greater benefits to certain populations of certain activities, and kind of reframing some of that knowledge so that architects and the general public can really take from that and apply it on their own.
I should probably mention that you guys are incredibly generous with your research. Your website is prolific with articles and research and case studies. So I'll put the link to your website in the description below. So the first edition launched right as COVID hit, and you couldn't do a more traditional rollout, but the book became more relevant than ever. So what were some of the lessons learned about why biophilia matters, to the workplace conversation?
Well, one of the things that became really apparent during the pandemic was people are spending a lot of time in the same space, day after day in the same space. And I think it inherently made people much more aware of their surroundings and what was missing, and the desire to get outside. So the experience of nature became something that people, I think, became a little bit more aware of during the pandemic. So then you go back into a standard office that doesn't have any of those features and you miss it. You definitely miss it. And so the question then is, how do we bring those experiences of nature into the built environment and into the working environment? It's so much more than just a green wall or a plant on the desk. There are lots and lots of different strategies, and the different strategies support different outcomes. So literally understanding what are the needs in the space. Is it stress reduction? Is it cognitive function? Is it in elevating people's mood? Different patterns or different experiences of nature lead to different outcomes. And so literally you can choose what outcome you want to support, and then that helps inform what pattern or what strategy you adopt.
There was a increase in the level of sensitivity to health and well-being coming out of the pandemic. And I'm wondering, was there anything in particular with biophilia that stood out as a solution for people to implement in the work environment?
Before thinking about the actual implementation, I think there was this realization process like Bill's talking about, but the literal, like, what were people doing and what were they trying to connect with? I just know I lived in downtown Brooklyn at the time. And so I would go, I lived in a high rise with a small window, and not, I wanted to be outdoors. And so I would go to Fort Greene Park, which is a familiar park to me that I'd always been going to. And I started going there more regularly during COVID, and it was packed with people. And part of me was like, why are you in my space? Like, this is my outdoor space. And the other part of me was like, it was so wonderful to see people using this space, because Fort Greene Park it's a wonderful rolling, multi-block park, but it isn't heavily utilized. But during COVID, every inch of lawn was covered with people picnicking and just being there. It wasn't just people going for a walk. They were there to stay. And it just made me kind of realize that people were not just acknowledging their need, but they were taking advantage of this opportunity, if you will, to really enjoy nature. And so you can't literally translate that right into the office space. But I feel like the access to nature from the office became a big thing. How do we lure people back to the office when at home they may have plants at their house, they may have a backyard, they may have a park nearby, when the office doesn't have that? Gone are the focus of like bouncy balls and billiards and free this and free that. There was definitely a shift in what it meant to have a workplace satisfaction with respect to design and experience.
So, where does biophilic design fit into the return to office story? Does it actually impact on whether people show up?
We think so. We've
We
heard
have evidence of
anecdotally, we
it.
don't have solid data, but we have definitely heard that. And the offices that we know of that have more biophilic features seem to have attracted people back a little sooner.
There's definitely clients that we've had that is one of their strategies, specifically using biophilic design to help. I mean, they may say it's focused on stress reduction, but they are trying to not just attract people back to the office, but to attract talent and retention. So they may or may not be measuring it, but that is their intent.
Interesting. Now, I think that we're all attracted to nature in one form or another. And I got to imagine that's better than going into a sterile box completely void of any natural elements.
The other component is within the pattern language of biophilic design, there are a number of spatial patterns, different spatial experiences. And the offices that seem to be most successful are the ones that play around with having a variety of different spatial experiences. It's not just a sea of workstations. In particular, they have really good ones play around with the pattern of refuge, where your back is protected and you may have some canopy overhead. And so we see a proliferation of booths and window seats and side entrance carrels and all these different spatial experiences that create that experience of refuge. And that's great. It gives you the chance to get away and focus, and it can be a space for a single person or a shared space as well. And so we're seeing some offices that do really amazing a combination of those. One in particular that was done just before the pandemic is the Interface Carpet Company's headquarters. What they call Base Camp in Midtown Atlanta, designed by Perkins and Will. And it's a fascinating building because before the pandemic, it was actually handling more people than it should have for the square footage. And they realized most people aren't at their desk all day long. And so a lot of people actually don't need a fixed desk. And so they designed a space that only had a few of those for people who absolutely had to have them. And then everyone else moved around the building to all these different spatial experiences over the course of the day that supported whatever they're doing at that time. And so it led to a building that square footage would have told you maybe max 100 people that was supporting around 140 people a day sometimes. And when Carnegie Mellon did a post occupancy evaluation just before the pandemic, it had the highest level of user satisfaction. Now, after the pandemic, interfaces were, would people come back? And initially they were thinking, oh, maybe we give up the building, maybe we, do something else. But people are back now and the building is being used and it's back in that pattern of lots of people and people moving around and using, the space that best suits whatever they're doing at the time. So it might be the big shared library table that it's like almost like a conference table out in the middle of a larger space in a library-like area or smaller meeting rooms, or there are a whole series of different booths and carrels, and there are some traditional desks.
There's
There's a
outdoor space
rooftop,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, there's a rooftop garden with a water feature and aromatic plantings, and just people move to where they're whatever suits what they're doing at that time.
That's one of the things that you've highlighted in the new edition of the book, where I think you've distinguished between single patterns versus multiple patterns. So I would imagine that having that variety is something that impacts the way that people perceive that. Is that something that you're seeing or learned from that space?
Yeah, that one and others. We've seen a series of spaces that one of the things that one of the things we sort of noticed in this new edition that we hadn't thought of quite as much in the first edition was this. There are some projects that kind of focus on one pattern and do a lot of different variations on it. So, interface, one of the patterns they really focused on was that experience of refuge. But there are lots of different ways to have that experience in that building. Then we see other buildings where they may focus on one outcome, but use multiple patterns to support that outcome. And so, an example of that would be a new fire station in Marion, Iowa, what was specifically designed to reduce PTSD and stress of firefighters. Most people don't realize how significant an issue that is in the firefighting world. And so to have a building that specifically was designed with a variety of different patterns that support the stress, lowering stress and create more sociable spaces, the outcomes on that have been pretty incredible.
I'm also fascinated with fractal lighting, and this feels like something that we've moved away from just dimming the lights or circadian rhythm. So, what's the science behind the fractal lighting now?
We knew there were sort of three bandwidths of complexity of fractals, and you can replicate that in lighting design through the use of fixtures, through the use of perforated metal screens with lights behind them, a variety of techniques. But we've known that really simple fractal patterns are kind of a little boring, right? They don't really get our attention. If they're really complex fractal patterns, they can be a little scary and actually elicit a fear response.
Can you describe what that would look like?
So if you think about, a piece of artwork that is like really abstract with a bunch of jagged angles in it, right? That would be a classic example of that. And you can produce that sort of light pattern on surfaces.
But Bill, just to be more specific, like there's the abstract art that is not used for this reason in like psychiatric hospitals. Like you don't put abstract art in psychiatric hospitals for that reason. It's got a high, I mean, assuming it is fractal, it has high fractal dimension, so it can elicit fear response or, some negative response to that. So that's kind of the direction that he's referring to.
So there's this range band of complexity, like the dappled sunlight under a tree, right? Or waves on a beach, or these are the ones that occur a lot in nature. And so when we see them in human design objects, the brain is predisposed to process them more easily. And we get a relaxation response. We get a stress lowering response. What the neuroscientists who do this work call fractal fluency. The brain is fluent with that kind of fractals and it lowers our stress. There's a measurement system called the fractal dimension, and it runs from 1 to 2. And so low complexity fractals would be the 1.1s, the 1.2s. The really high dimensions would be the 1.8, 1.9.
And what are you measuring with those numbers?
It's a mathematical measurement of the complexity of the pattern. So what you're looking for is that sort of mid-range bandwidth, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, maybe up to a little bit to 1.7 sometimes. But in that sort of mid-range is where we see the fractal fluency and the relaxation response. In recent years, the researchers discovered that there's a narrow bandwidth just between the too much and the calming that elicits a different response. And so that response is engagement. And so an example of applying that would be a restaurant that was recently done in Bucharest in Romania that during most of the day it operates as a sort of chill bar. And so it has these overhead metal perforated panels and the light pattern comes through there and it's pretty chill inside. It's pretty awesome. It's really nice. In the evening, it shifts over to become a restaurant. And a restaurant, you don't want people chill, you want them engaged. And so the lighting shifts to produce that slightly more complex fractal.
So it's a tuning is what they've been referring to it as. They're tuning the fractal dimension or the fractal lighting experience. So it's not a dimming, actually they're changing the frequency.
Yeah, pattern changes.
So is this something that a designer can look for and adjust? And how do we know where there's too much or not enough?
So that's sort of the cutting edge still. And there is software that will analyze a fractal pattern. And there are firms that specialize in that.
But 13 and 9 design and InnoCAD architects are the ones who designed that space in Bucharest with Richard Taylor out of University of Oregon. And they've done several other fractal lighting projects, but they're definitely at the forefront of that strategy, that technology, that science.
Interesting. So, and you're saying that our brains are basically pre-wired to react to these patterns, and we can adjust from being very relaxed to being more engaged, or even sounds like fearful.
Yeah, depending on how you turn the complexity of the fractal.
So is there a way to explain that if I'm involved in working on an office design and I'm trying to bring more engagement into that work environment? How would I go about presenting that or explaining that to the team that is involved making the decisions?
Well, one would be show them the examples in the book. That's probably helpful. But also do a walkthrough of, have people think about fractal experiences in nature, like that dappled sunlight under a tree, or watching flames in a fireplace, and have them think about the reaction they have to that. In particular, because the flames are one that in a fire, a campfire, is pushing into that sort of next level of complexity, right? Where if you think, watching a fireplace, it can be relaxing, but it's also deeply engaging, right? We are really, really engaged by that. And so that would be, a way to explain it to people.
Yeah, for office design, you might also consider that you're not necessarily needing to tune the space regularly like that restaurant slash bar, right? They have very different activities in the same space. In an office, you might have a zoning strategy and what activities happen in different spaces. You might not need to tune it actively. It might be something as part of the basis, the base design strategy. Like what experience are we trying to trigger in this space? Maybe it has to do more with circadian lighting design, or maybe there are options that through the controls, but understanding how the space might be used or who the target is or the activities can be a good place to start.
One of the other things that we had talked about earlier were the micro experiences of awe. The idea that stopping to observe a bird's nest or a cocoon can be physiologically powerful, more powerful than a walk in nature. That sort of feels counterintuitive. What's the research showing there, and how can we create those moments?
That the research on micro awe is for me fascinating. Most of the research on awe focuses on sort of the grand, right? Walking up to the Grand Canyon, walking into the Sagrada Familia Cathedral, right? These, awe-inspiring, where you see the full on the jaws drop and the eyes get wide, and that dramatic experience of awe. But you can have these smaller experiences of awe. A study that in particular fascinated me was one where they were taking seniors out for a nature walk, and it was a guided nature walk, and they recorded physiological response. And the outcomes were, not surprisingly, better heart rate, better blood pressure, lower levels of stress from that nature walk. They then replicated the experiment, same route, another group of seniors, but they would stop and observe the cocoon or the bird's nest, or these little experiences where people could, have a little conversation, and really look at something and have this smaller experience of awe. And what they found was an improvement beyond just the experience of nature, but actually better physiological responses out of that. And so that was for us pretty intriguing. And the question then is, can I create, micro experiences of that in the built environment? I have one that occurred yesterday in my townhouse here in Washington, D.C. On noon, on the solstice, a shaft of light appears on the wall and on one of the stairs in the stairwell right at solar noon on the solstice. Sort of like the sun dagger in Chaco Canyon. I have one of those that appears in my house, and that's once a year. Boom, I get that amazing, yeah. And is it awe-inspiring? For me, it is. Yeah, it's pretty incredible to see this shaft of light appear, and only then.
Well, that's great. It sounds like a lot of fun. I guess there's also emerging science linking nature exposure to genetic expression and actually exchanging how aging genes are expressed. What are the implications and how dramatic of a change can be realized?
That's pretty new research on the epigenetics, and thinking about how, one of the things we forget is that yeah, we have all these genes, but not all of them get turned on or not all of them express in the same way. And so learning that experiences of nature can change, particularly the triggers of aging, is particularly intriguing for me. And that's emerging science, but that's a pretty powerful outcome. And it would fit with earlier research, like research on if you increase the tree canopy in a neighborhood, what happens to people's health outcomes and sort of their medical age versus their actual age. And in some cases, it improves their medical age by 7 to 10 years. And so that's a pretty powerful outcome.
Yeah, is there an example of something like that that could be incorporated into the physical environment that would reduce aging?
Don't know. Well,
No
in
promises.
yeah,
Yeah.
obviously we know street tree planting and parks and all of that help. On the indoors, don't know yet. I don't know which measures would help with that the best.
It's a long-term study.
Yeah.
Uh,
We've also talked a little bit about people on the autism spectrum, and neuroscience is a big topic in the workplace right now. What do you think's the solution for that for neurodivergent people? And I guess that can it help the rest of us?
Yeah, Kay Sargent is in the architecture world is probably one of the folks who's thought the most about design and neurodivergence. And she says, ultimately, all of us are process information and the world differently. We're all in our own way neurodiverse, some just more so than others. And so if we design for the neurodivergent, we're basically picking up everybody along the way. So one of the things that we're just in the early stages of trying to noodle this topic around, in particular autism, children on the autism spectrum, and the impact that has on school design. If it's relevant for children, it's relevant for adults as well. And so the strategies we've seen used to date that we think are quite good are things like providing refuge spaces, using biomorphic forms and patterns that have a calming effect, providing stimulation materials, stimming materials like
multisensory, tactile materials.
for when the children need to stimulate themselves to re-engage or rebalance. So, things like a basin of wood chips or bark or gravel or water, having places where those are available. The refuge experience where where the person can withdraw a little bit, but not completely away, but withdraw and still be able to see the action around them. So still be present, but also be in a refuge experience of the ability to control sound and light levels as well. And having spaces that are not the same lighting everywhere and not the same sound everywhere and not the same temperature everywhere, right? Our old lighting standards, the oldest lighting standards back in the 1950s were uniform lighting everywhere at 30 inches above the floor, right? Which was great if all the work was black ink on white sheets of paper on a desktop. That's not our world anymore. But in some ways, we're still sort of trapped with those lighting standards. Similarly, the actually comfort envelope dream of having uniform temperature, airflow, and humidity in the space throughout the entire space, A, is unrealistic, and B, actually is counterproductive.
Let's talk about a couple of your projects. We talked a little bit about the interface project, but one that I'd like to dive a little deeper into is the Royal College of Physicians. And I've got to imagine that, working for a group of physicians, they're very demanding. They probably expect a lot of the science to back up what you're doing. So can you tell us a little bit about what that project was like? What was the evidence-based biophilic design that went into that project?
Well, the architects, Rob Hopkins out of AHR, teamed up with the Royal College of Physicians to develop a new building. Our RCP has only moved like 5 times in the last 500 years. Whatever they were going to do, it had to be impactful and really speaking to their values. Also worth noting is that the members of the RCP are the kind of researchers and writers who are responsible for the research and setting the standards and thresholds for health and well-being that form the International Well Building Standard. They know what they're doing and they understand the science already. they really challenged the design team to incorporate and validate all their design decisions to support this like healthiest building concept. And also, contrary to what the industry typically demands, is that the RCP actually said you have to do well platinum, but instead of trying to validate or give a rationale for each criteria that you pursue, you have to give a rationale for not pursuing something. So they kind of turned the model on its head. So that was just really great leadership to start with. So you have a really unique client there, but they already understand the science. So they were perhaps unusually a high level of engagement in the design process, and they really wanted to be able to visually communicate this as well as experientially. So what people most are familiar with the spine is the pattern of the facade, which is it's a model of the integumentary system of the body, like the skin cells. But that's a frit pattern that creates an interior experience with lighting, casting shadows and light. But then inside you have a lot of daylight in all different space types. So this is both an office and a school and a clinic, but it's meant to represent what the future of healthcare facilities could be. And the rationale or the intent was to create the workplace experience that physicians would later demand, so that hospitals and clinics could be designed in this way in the future. So that was kind of like the basis of their design. And so biophilic design became one of the primary strategies for encapsulating that concept in both the communal spaces, the offices, the clinics, like throughout the building and all different space types. CBRE did a workplace survey at the end of that project. It opened in 2021, I believe. And a lot of the responses that came back from that were comments like, I love going to work, or I'm less stressed doing work in the office than I am at home. Like things like that came out of that project. And so it's a very unique and powerful example of what workplace and education and healthcare and training facilities could be.
And it sounds like a fascinating project and an experience going through that process. Another one that I enjoyed learning about last time we spoke was the Baltimore school that you did, and the changes that you made to the classroom and the way that the grades improved by the students who had experienced that. And I guess now that's been followed by a completely new school that's based on what they learned. Can you tell us that story and a little bit about the research and the numbers that came out of that project?
Yeah, that one's pretty extraordinary. So Jim Detterman, CDG, who led the Baltimore Green Street Academy study, then took whatever we all learned out of that and a lot of the really simple strategies from that and applied it to the design of a brand new school in South Carolina, Bethel Hanbury. And it was a great opportunity to do a larger study because it was a replacement school. So a known population of students and teachers and administrators moved from an existing school into this new one. And then a university team watched and took measurements and did survey work and looked at what happened after that first year of occupancy. And what they saw was improvements in math, improvements in reading, improvements in overall test scores, pretty dramatic drop in absenteeism, and on the administrative side, less behavioral outbreaks, and then also better retention of teachers, which for the school system was one of the things they were most happy about. And so that was an exciting outcome. And we're working with the team now to replicate the experiment one more time in manufactured or modular classrooms, which is something I hate them. I think they're awful spaces. But for many school systems, they are the reality of they don't have the budget to rebuild or replace or expand schools. And so that's what they're putting students and teachers in. And so we're involved with a group that's doing an experiment to see, can we improve those little metal boxes?
Yeah, no, that's such a great story. I really enjoyed learning about that. The Portland Airport's another great project that covers 9 acres. It's mostly daylit. There's 49 different skylights, if I understand correctly. I mean, that's a pretty exciting project. It's completely different scale, but can you tell us a little bit about or share some insights with us on that project?
Sure. That project is a great example of where the client was really focused on the health outcome. That from the very beginning, their design brief was to, among a few other sustainability measures, was to reduce passenger stress. And so that was the basis for bringing in biophilic design as an overarching passenger experience strategy. And so it was integrated throughout that space. But we also treated it as a workplace, recognizing that some passengers are, it's not a hub airport, right? It's kind of the end of the line for most flights. So you have repeat customers, repeat passengers, but you have also people who live and work in Portland and around Portland who are there every day for hours at a time. So we had to think of it as a workplace experience. Biophilic design was framed as the health strategy within the sustainability narrative. So we were paired up with the MEPs and the civil and the architects and like all the other disciplines within the sustainability initiative to make sure that anything relating to health and biophilia was also run by the MEP and run by, the materials team to make sure that our strategies all aligned so that one didn't overrun the other. That was kind of behind the scenes structure to how we were able to accomplish what we did. But along the way, there were much more visible initiatives where we had to, it's a huge space, like you said. So how do you maximize the opportunity without breaking the bank? So we really focused on where those key points are throughout the journey, the passenger journey. Where might somebody be most stressed? Where can we have the greatest impact? Where are those moments, transition moments from one experience to another? So, through the design process, the team as a whole was able to kind of narrow down and point to where most passenger and workers would cross paths in locations where the highest stress points might be. And so we identified those as the key places to really emphasize the biophilic experience, either through material choices, through the canopy, the ceiling design, through plants, through daylighting. And so there's different solutions in different spaces throughout the passenger experience that kind of emphasize that. While you might go in and say, oh, well, there's biophilia everywhere, but really, if you take a look at it, you can really pinpoint those key interventions.
So four of besides just having an enormous wood structure, which in itself is, yeah, you see, and you can see the wood, you can see the wood grain. It's really, even though it's 9 acres in size, you can still see the individual boards in it. It's really extraordinary. But there are sort of four major interventions. The first one is the transition point from the area of bag drop and ticketing to through the marketplace to where you first see the queuing for security screening. And so that transition area is called the scene. And so that has the biggest of all the skylights over it. And under that skylight are four massive in-ground planters with full-sized living trees and plants on the understory. And so it looks like you're walking through a little piece of local Portland or forest. And so, a little bit of forest bathing, but so you're getting the dappled sunlight on the ground, you're getting that visual connection to nature and walking through that forest. So that's the first one. Then while you're waiting in the lines to go through TSA screening is underneath a set of conference rooms. So there's not the open ceiling above it. TSA didn't want an open ceiling above it. And so that then presented us with a more than 20-foot high, 130-foot long blank wall. And so that, which is the biggest thing in your visual field. And so that blank wall is covered with an LED screen that only shows videos of nature scenes of Oregon. And they were commissioned by the Port of Portland as an art project. And they're really, really extraordinary. And there's waterfalls and volcanoes and the coast, African American cowboys riding the plains of Eastern Oregon. There are some are digital, others are pure video, and they move, but they move slowly. They only move at the pace of someone walking. And so that's what you're seeing while you're waiting to go through TSA screening. And we know that that visual connection to nature lowers people's stress and engages them. And some of these videos are really quite striking and really beautiful. Then the third intervention is when you come out of security, there's usually that awful little metal bench, right? And that's actually in airport design, that little segment there where you have to put your shoes on and repack your bag and all that is called recomposure. And in most places, it's just, it's an afterthought. It's one bench, which is not enough. And it's a pretty awful experience. So why not have a planter that's shaped like a giant rock that has a ledge on it that you can sit on, or a higher up ledge where you can repack your bag? And in that planter is another big living tree and an understory beneath it. So, we're back to the forest again. And then the fourth intervention is when you come out of that zone and you're heading towards through a marketplace, but you're heading towards a major intersection, one on the north and one on the south, where you have to decide, am I going to a lounge? Am I getting food? Am I meeting friends here? Am I going to the concourse to my left and the concourse to my right? That place has floor to ceiling windows with a view out to north side out towards the Columbia River, on the south side out towards the forest. And then overhead is the hanging gardens, suspended hanging gardens. And so those are the four sort of biggest interventions. And there are others in other places, but those are four places where we identified people are stressed.
You had mentioned, I guess, that the Portland airport story really goes beyond the building itself, that it's touched the local economy, the cultural identity, carbon. Talk more about the ecosystem and the expanded benefits of biophilic design from that project.
Well, I think that it's important to note that this was also something that was from the very beginning, interest of the client was to make these connections, not just through biophilic design, but through sustainability and just the overarching design solution for the airport. And biophilic design was one piece of that is woven throughout. But I think it's really a testament to how the owner driving that that interest really makes a difference.
Yeah, the move to wood was really pretty extraordinary. And it was driven by a whole series of different factors. The first one was the original roof of the existing portion of the terminal was concrete T-joists. Great structural system, somewhat problematic when you discover that you are living in a Richter 9 earthquake zone. And so
With
needed,
liquefaction, high risk
yeah.
liquefaction.
So when when you make all that discovery, you need to come up with a roof system that is lighter and a little more flexible and can deal with survive a Richter 9 earthquake. Portland's economy, Portland started as exporting wood, major industry there, which is greatly diminished and almost gone now. And so the whole wood and lumber industry was a major portion of the history of Portland and the state. So how do we connect to that? Carbon and climate change are also major issues that are really important. So the decision to do a wood structure, a mass timber structure, supported all of that. And the structure is a series of steel, sort of Y-shaped columns, then with caps on top of those that allow the roof to slide around and move during an earthquake event. And then there are glulam beams that are over 80 feet long and 16 feet deep, enormous curving glulam beams that connect across. And then on top of that is mass plywood, which allows you all the curvature that we have in the hills and valleys and the curvature that you see in the roof. And then an understory of Douglas fir slats. And so the decision was made that the wood should all be sustainably harvested. And so they went with FSC certification plus additional criteria that EcoTrust, a local environmental group, added in. One was additional riparian zone protection, and another was shifting the harvest rotation from 40 years to 60 years, so increasing the harvest rotation on the woodlots. That meant that all the wood was locally sourced, and there were actually 13 different woodlots that provided the wood. So over more than 3 million board feet of timber. So it was all locally sourced with that sustainability criteria. And then the components were manufactured locally as well. And so it really helped support and push further the mass timber industry in Oregon and Washington state.
There was a lot of coordination to get all of that working in the same schedule, because you're working with a lot of tribal forests and small local businesses, and color. There's differences in color, so there had to be this decision that it was okay for color to be color variations and imperfections, and then the timing to have it all available when they needed it. So a lot of coordination, and the team really, I think it was a pretty amazing feat to get that all done together.
Well, it sounds like an incredible project.
And from a carbon standpoint, did something that is never done at that scale before, and that is that wood structure sequesters more carbon than it took to make it. So we can then use that for offsetting some of the carbon from the concrete and steel and other components. And so that really dramatically advances the whole conversation about embodied carbon. The extensive daylighting, the improved envelope performance, and shifting to a geothermal system cut the energy use of the whole thing by 50% over what it was before, even though it's a much larger square footage. So an enormous improvement there.
Yeah, so you have a roof structure that is benefiting the local economy and the local businesses. It's good. You have the carbon sequestration story, and then you also have the biophilic story and the seismic story. So together, this one, major element of the building has so many contributions to the success of the building, the performance of the building, the experience of the building.
Well, it sounds like an incredibly exciting project. And I'm just thinking about how that could translate to the work environment that we're so familiar with. And I think a lot of the return to office conversation has been driven by mandate, not desire, but what you just described is someplace that I want to go to and see it. So I'm
You
trying to
can.
think of.
You don't need to buy a ticket. You can just go. Actually, I have taken the time when I visit the airport to just approach people who are sitting on the massive wooden amphitheater stairways, and I ask them why they choose to sit there. It's like they'll have a TSA sign on their back. So I know they're working there, and they say that the stairways are better than their break rooms, and they can sit there and watch and eat their lunch on the stair. So it's a public amenity that people who work there are choosing to stay there and enjoy the experience of the space, rather than going to a non-biophilic space that is not designed for their health and well-being.
Yeah, and it just sounds like an incredibly exciting space and an experience to be there. So I'm kind of wondering, to translate that to the work environment, if a company's leadership is listening to this right now and they're planning the renovation for a new office or an office building, they've got the real estate and the design team. What's one thing that you would suggest that they dive deeper into to help achieve some of the things that you just described, the Portland Airport project?
Yeah, I think we probably both have something to say on this. I do think taking a moment to really understand the opportunity would be big. We've worked with clients who didn't understand biophilia from anything else at the start of the project. But once they got introduced to it and they began to understand what the potential impact was and the opportunity for massive building wide impact, they became our strongest allies in instituting biophilic design in the most effective way. So, and that, I think that's true of anything that's important to a client. Like, understanding the opportunity is probably one of the best things that they can do.
experience in a massive corporate headquarters that had a variety of different spaces in it with lots of different users and a huge, enormous building. And so biophilia became the sort of common thread through the building, was that there were biophilic experiences that tied the whole place together, and which was particularly important because there were 5 different design teams doing the different interiors in the building. And so having a common experiential thread to tie it together made the whole building a stronger design.
Yeah, so I think the realization that biophilia isn't just about having plants in the office was for the project that Bill's talking about was the trigger. It was like, oh wait, there's a lot more to this than plants. What else can we do to optimize the workplace experience? And that's what started triggering conversations with not just the people designing the terrace or the green wall, but also the various architecture teams, the lighting people who are focused on lighting design specifically on trading floors. Like there was and material selection and the different spatial characteristics. So it really became really holistic effort to a design solution rather than something that was just added on.
If you look 5 to 10 years down the road, how do you see things evolving for the built environment? And how do you see biophilia playing a role in that?
Well, one of the things we're getting involved in is a little bit of work on using virtual reality to understand mocking up a space. Particularly, there have been a series of experiments that indicate that the physiological response to a VR and the psychological response to seeing a space in VR is not the same as the real space, but it's enough to indicate sort of the responses that we should see in the real space. And so that allows us the ability to do what ifs and mock ups and experiments before space gets built to optimize what are the biophilic elements in a design. And so that's something we're pretty excited about.
Yeah, there's not a lot of barriers to that technology either. So I could see that design firms picking that up and it becoming more of a standard practice in, I don't know. I don't know if 10 years is the right window of time, but I would hope that at least it would become familiar within 10 years.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to tell us a little bit about the book and the new edition that's come out. So, how can people find it? I know it's coming out in July, right?
Yes, it's available for pre-order now, but the books will be shipped starting July 1st and it can be purchased. It's a Reba Publishing is circulating the book, but you can purchase it through in the US, Rutledge or Taylor and Francis.
Rutledge or Taylor and
Correct.
Francis, or, or so in the US, you can buy the book through Rutledge, through Taylor and Francis, or through Amazon. In the UK, you can buy it directly from the Royal Institute of British Architects, from RIBA. And so, yeah, it'll be hopefully widely available on July 1st.
Actually, I've already purchased a couple, so they're due to arrive on July 8th, I think. But you can get it through Amazon as well. But that's through Rutledge, and they have right now they have a deal where if you buy 3 or more, you get 25% off. So I think Rutledge, even though people are familiar with Amazon, like they might be comfortable with it, going through Rutledge might actually get you a better deal.
We'll put the link in the description below for everybody to find it easily.
So the new edition has some updated science, some of the insights of what we've learned in the last 5 years since the first edition came up, and updates of some of the existing case studies and a series of new case studies, some of which we're extraordinarily excited about, some of which are just spaces that you never would have guessed, things like a study hall in a bomb shelter. That is one of the coolest spaces I've ever seen at Canicum, which is a school of economics at Uppsala University in Sweden. A restaurant in the undercroft of a skyscraper in downtown Sydney. This is 5-story high space that was windswept, and they tried a bunch of different uses in it that never worked. And the architect who was brought in by this restaurant company, Meat and Wine, looked at that space, and he's originally from South Africa, and said, well, this feels like where you would have a boma, which that the circular enclosed village structure. And so they created a boma, and within that are these individual huts, and each of the huts has a table in it, and people sit in those. And they actually did mock-ups to get everything, physical mock-ups to get the dimensions right and make it comfortable and really work. And even when it's raining and it's nasty outside, people want to be in those huts. It's really pretty extraordinary.
So I think the quality of the projects that we've highlighted in this second edition elevated the standard for biophilic design. And we've added also more details about like what are the key takeaways from these projects. Some details that we wanted to put in the first edition, but ran out of time. So we were excited to be able to incorporate a little extra into each of the case studies.
Great. It sounds like it's got a lot of great information in it. This has been a great conversation. I know we just scratched the surface on the topic, and I expect we'll have to have another one of these in the future again. But I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights with us and telling us all the stories related to biophilia. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.